This episode was made possible by our generous patrons. Welcome to episode 149 of the Inktofilm podcast, where we read the book
and then see the movie.
I'm James.
And I'm Luke.
And this week we discuss Rob Reiner's 1987 film, The Princess Bride. So if you can believe it, listener, this episode, actually today, this episode will come out 2 days later, but today, Tuesday, the 18th, is the 3-year anniversary of Inktofilm. It's 3 years since we've posted our first episode covering Stephen King's It. It definitely hasn't felt like 3 years to me. At times I feel like it has, maybe during this quarantine it definitely has. But I just can't believe it's been 3 years, and thank everybody so much for the support. And we made some social media posts earlier. Luke mentioned in the post, we would not be still doing this if not for the support of people actually listening to the podcast. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well said. 3 years, 149 episodes with this one. Next week we'll be hitting 150, so we're kind of stacking milestones back to back here. But yeah, 3 years is a, it's a big amount of time to devote to something. And I definitely feel like over time we've learned a lot. I know I have. I know a lot more about films now than I ever did. I feel like I've dug more into books than I ever had before. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of things that I've learned from doing this podcast. So it's been a great time, and yeah, I'm grateful that it's something that we have an audience for, and definitely appreciate everybody's support these last 3 years. Absolutely, cheers to you. I'm drinking some whiskey right now, so cheers.
Yeah, cheers. So we are discussing The Princess Bride, the film. Last week we discussed the book, and I've said multiple times this is one of my favorite movies, and watching it this time was no different. It's a comfort movie for me, and I think it's a movie that grows with you. Like as a kid, I feel like I appreciated it for different reasons, and as time has gone on, I've appreciated it for different comedic elements or like meta commentaries that are being made and allegory maybe sometimes. And I don't know. I think there's a lot to love in this movie. It just feels like purely what movies are. When things go well, when everything comes together, you get sort of magic on screen. I feel like this movie definitely represents just like magic in a very unique way. I think we've talked a lot, and especially in our book episode, about how it's sort of doing everything that fantasy's done before. And I think that's the same for the movie in certain ways, and doing things that fantasy movies specifically have done before as well. But it's that nobody's done this since this, like people may have tried, but it's sort of unique unto itself.
Yeah. It is a very unique movie, absolutely. I spoke last week a little bit about how I have been kind of mixed on this movie historically. Watching it this time, it didn't completely erase all of the sort of feelings I had about it that were maybe a little more mixed, but some of them went away. And I think reading the book first really helped kind of enrich the experience for me. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, like you said, it's a comforting movie. It's a very happy movie, right? It makes you feel good watching this movie. There's very little about it that's gonna hit you the wrong way. And I can see why people love it. It's funny. A lot of the comedy really holds up. A lot of the performances are iconic, and it also has. I was thinking about this. It has a script that I feel like you read this script and you're like, either this could be amazing or this movie could be terrible. And it's going to depend on a lot of things. And because like the exact way that like the three villains, I call them the three villains, but they're not villains. It's one villain and they're his two henchmen, right? The way that they interact with the Man in Black, it ends up being so fun and enjoyable, whereas in a different filmmaker's hands, or like a different alternate version of this movie, alternate universe version of this movie, it could be super cheesy and not hit that perfect note it needs to hit to land somewhere that is like making fun of itself, but taking itself seriously enough to where you can take it seriously too, all while having a good time. And I want to give it credit for finding that tone, which I think is very hard to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's sort of a disaster. This movie was a disaster waiting to happen. I think not directed perfectly, not perform. I think without the performances, you don't have anything. I think that this could have been a forgettable movie, but you have the interesting framing device, which was as we've talked about, it's taken straight from the book. And I think the book does a much better job of making that framing device more interesting even than the movie does.
Yeah, I would say it's a very watered down version of the framing device. It's very simplified. It's really just kind of one moment of the frame that you get in the book, where it's like specifically him reading it to his son, which is only like kind of a piece of the framing device in the book, I guess.
Yeah, and yet by the end it still works for me. Like the grandfather, the grandson who's like reluctant to hear the story, eventually by the end wants grandpa to come back and read him more stories. So like it ends up working and serving sort of the same purpose, but it doesn't get as meta and crazy into telling the story like the book does. But I also want to say that I think having the narration built into this story sort of keeps it moving along. I think in order to scrape off some time in the beginning and the end, and to explain things with dialogue and just sort of setting the story up, things that people would normally get annoyed with, it's a built-in mechanic of the story. So I think it's forgiven. Early on, it's like we're given all these places and all these character names, and we sort of just jump to the certain scenes that shine in the story, in the book itself. So it's interesting how the abridgment that we talked about, that Goldman is doing of Morgenstern's material, we then get the adaptation is also sort of taking liberties where it needs to cut for time and to sort of dig down to what the film needed to be. And I will say that about the film, the pacing's great. I think like it flies by.
Yeah, 1.5-hour movie.
It's perfect length. It there's no parts that I'm like, I gotta skip this. I felt the entire time engaged, and I've seen it a million times.
Yeah. In regards to the framing device, in the movie, we are the boy in the bed being told the story. He is the sort of audience stand-in, right? Who's a little bit skeptical at first, then is bought into it. I also love the details they gave us at the beginning to establish him as like a sports-loving kid, not a like fantasy-loving kid. Like he doesn't have any like D&D posters on his wall or anything.
Right.
He's playing a football video game. He's wearing a jersey, or he's playing a baseball video game. He's wearing a football jersey, that kind of stuff. So you're winning over this kid who's already not necessarily the target audience, but he actually is. He just doesn't know it yet, right? And that's kind of the joy of that. We can be in his place, and we can be won over too. Which I think that works great. I do think the key difference between that and the book is the audience is on the side of the author in the book. So when he is telling his son the story, and his son doesn't like the first chapter, and then like stops reading it, and then it's like later we get I think the grandson ends up being into it, but like it's spread out over time. We're on the dad's side. We're on the author's side, right? Who I guess he's William Goldman, but he's also like this fictionalized version of him. And I do think that that's a key difference, because it would be like if in the movie we felt like a stronger connection to the grandfather than we do the kid, which we don't, in my opinion. I think we feel like we're the kid.
Right.
And that fundamental difference it changes a little bit the way I feel about the story. I don't know. Like I guess I do think it works better in a movie to be this way, but I want to highlight that difference for people, because I do think if you go read the book, that is something you'll find that sort of changes things up pretty different in a pretty big way.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of established at this point that like the framing device, while in 1987 when the film came out, people were excited about it. They thought it was really interesting. This story being told, the story of a story being told, and what's even crazier to think is just like Goldman was doing it 10 years plus prior. In a novel 70s, in a much deeper context, like he was really digging into the mind of like the author and how the author's breaking in to tell us things rather than the son getting annoyed, the grandson getting annoyed and breaking in to tell us he's bored or that he's not liking the kissing scenes and things like that. So like the breaks in the fourth wall, the breaks that are happening to the audience are more, I don't know, eloquent, I guess. It's like, I think it's just, it almost feels like in the movie, it's fun and interesting when he's like, come on, because if we were reading the story, maybe we would roll our eyes at the first mention of sort of the fairy tale that we've heard a million times with somebody comes to save the day of some princess and they kiss and all that. And like, I guess breaking in that way is interesting, but it's much more interesting to me now to read Goldman's original material and hear like him speaking about the intentions of a fake author, like how meta and crazy that is.
That's what I was going to say. He's engaging with this S. Morgenstern, who wrote the book. And he himself is like, I don't know what he was thinking here with this, and like he's making all these comments on it, which is a different meta level than what we're getting in the film, like you said.
I mean, I do think we should start out. This is like the most endlessly quotable movie. Let's talk favorite parts, because I feel like this is the movie to do it in. Is there things that, tell me your favorite things that stand out? What made you actually laugh?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I do want to resist the urge to just like quote this movie a million times in this episode.
Right. That's why I'm giving us an opportunity to do it right now, and then we can get it out of the way. Right.
Yeah. And I think it's one of those things where it's like different things stand out to me different times watching it, I tweeted out a line where Westley is talking about why he wears a mask, and he says it's super comfortable. I think everyone will be doing it in the future, which I thought was funny considering today, like, we're all should be wearing masks, wear a mask. And I thought it was fun that Wesley's like giving us this message from the 80s. So yeah, it changes every time. I mean, there's all the like big ones everyone knows. I'm not going to repeat them here. Honestly, I'm not great at like quoting things word for word, and I'll probably screw it up. I haven't seen this movie as many times as you. So how about you tell me some of your favorites?
Okay, so many that stand out, obviously. My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father, prepare to die is like one of the most quotable things ever. And that was the first huge quotable line for me when I was a kid. I loved that part. I just loved Inigo Montoya.
So can I cut in and just talk about that line for a second?
Yeah.
That line changed dramatically for me after having read the book and researched the book, because we talked about last episode. So also we should point out, in case you don't know, William Goldman, the author of the original novel, is the screenwriter of this movie. So it is very, very consistent as to like who is telling this story. It is William Goldman. William Goldman's own father committed suicide when he was in high school, was an alcoholic who committed suicide. And so to me, when I hear that line, I hear Goldman speaking about his own father. And I actually, like, it hit me differently this time. Like, I almost got choked up hearing the line in a way that I never did before.
Right. It's simultaneously so sad and so awesome. You're so invested in his revenge, or like his avenging, journey. I do want to say Mandy Patinkin, who played Inigo, revealed that acting on Inigo's quest to avenge his father's murder brought back memories of losing his own father to cancer in 1972. He said that when filming the scene when Inigo kills the six-finger man, he felt he had just killed the cancer that killed his father. So another layer of
That's perfect, man. That's exactly, because that is what he needs to tap into, I think, to get at the line that William Goldman wrote. And I think that comes across, because that's the moment where it hit me, because he says it earlier in the film, and that's not when I almost choked up. It was that moment when he says it with all that passion, and before he kills the guy. Yeah, that's when it got me. Yeah,
and the whole cast, we'll just say right now, the entire cast is amazing. Everyone was perfectly cast.
Andre the Giant is so lovable, and he does such a great job as Fezzik. Right. And I want to give a shout out to the bonus material that is in the book, the later version of the book, the 25th and 30th year anniversary editions, have a short story at the end of them that I won't spoil. But I really loved what Fezzik gets into basically in those stories. I think that was one of my favorite parts. So bringing that knowledge to me to watch this movie also just made me have even more affection for Fezzik and Andre the Giant's portrayal of him.
I mean, we talked about how like Andre the Giant was larger than what even Goldman had created in a story. So then he went on to write another story, which like furthered the legend. And just like I watched all the bonus, the special features on my Blu-ray, and I did a bunch of research and just like learning about Andre the Giant and like how his whole life he was doing like WWF wrestling and all of this, and like it destroyed his body. So by the time they do this movie, any of the times that you're seeing feats of strength, he actually couldn't support that kind of weight on his back. So you can find times where it's clear that he's not actually doing the feat of strength. There's some sort of like, support system, or somebody's like, if like when Wesley's like around his neck, there's like he's on like a ramp so that he's not actually on his back, and all this. When he's catching Buttercup at the end out of the window, there's like a whole board setup situation where he really did catch her, but he was like sort of bolted in so that it wouldn't create like pressure on his back. Anyway,
wow. Yeah.
He was in severe pain during a lot of this movie just due to like his his medical condition, that like he being that large was a condition for him, and he actually died in 1993 at like 47 or 40 something, I believe. So like I watched a lot of interviews with everybody getting the cast back together, and they just loved talking about Andre the Giant. Like he was such a magnetic character around them, and he meant so much to them. He was so kind. And so just to see Goldman take that persona and that character and like further him in the material again, it just warms my heart. And
that was our interpretation of it, at least. I don't know if he said that officially, but like it felt like to me that version of Fezzik was informed by the version we saw on screen.
Right. I mean, it feels that way to me as well. There are legendary stories of like how much he would drink on set and off set, and like how funny that became. Billy Crystal tells a story about about Andre the Giant being like passed out in a hotel lobby, and like they tried to wake him up, he wouldn't wake up, and like nobody could move him because he's so massive. And like just like how, I don't know, he's just a like kind of a lively person, and just like stories like that galore.
Yeah.
It just so, rest in peace, Andre the Giant. He meant a ton to this movie, obviously a ton to a lot of people, and from all accounts was just like the nicest guy. And what's funny is I think his accent that like is so heavy is just like part of Fezzik. Like maybe it wasn't intentional, but like it fits into that character for me so much now that just hearing his voice, it's so fitting for that character.
Yeah, he has a particularly deep and like resonant voice that honestly is so deep it's almost difficult to hear the performance he's giving.
Right.
I don't know if just the version that's on Disney Plus, which by the way, if you want to watch this right now, it's on Disney Plus if you have that.
I think it's also partially like his super super thick, like I think French accent. I believe French.
No, you're right. It's a combination of the two. But the version that I was able to watch this time, I felt like had like a great sound quality to where I was able to understand him better than maybe I had in the past. Because I think there were times in the past where I saw this movie and his lines went by me and I was like, what did he say? And that wasn't happening as much here.
Yeah. One of the most quoted things for sure is, bye-bye, boys. Have fun storming the castle. It's Miracle Max and his wife talking to each other. That always makes me laugh. I think Miracle Max is one of my favorite parts of this movie as well. Billy Crystal kills it.
Really? Yeah. He's funny. That scene always felt like a weird fit for me. Like having these two characters show up and speak with this like sort of Queen's sort of accent that just to me feels out of place for this medieval world. But like you can hand wave that all away of like this is a story being read by a grandfather. Like it, you know what I mean? Like it kind of forgives itself of anything because it's like this is a book. He's just giving this character this voice or something. You know what I mean? You could read into it that way.
And there's some degree to like sort of film history going on here, because there was like, I know for a fact that Billy Crystal was sort of channeling some other characters. Like he's sort of channeling your Mel Brooks characters and some of like, so Rob Reiner's the director of this film. His father just passed away, Carl Reiner. He's a legend, comedic actor legend. So rest in peace to him. He was, best friends with Mel Brooks, and they were basically, they were huge in Hollywood comedy. And I'm pretty sure with all that comedic pedigree flowing through the movie there, that like there's some sort of channeling going on there within. And you said like sort of the accent definitely is a little bit out of place, but
and I say Queens, but I don't know. It's probably something else. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Honestly,
that's my guess.
I assume that there's something like Jewish within it because I know all of them are Jewish people.
Like Jewish
so I think it's
like person from Queens. Is like,
potentially like sort of like a Jewish caricature, and like I don't, I'm sure that I'm like almost 100% sure that Mel Brooks is Jewish, and I think Carl Reiner and Rob Reiner probably.
Well, William Goldman is, raised Jewish family.
Right. So like to maybe there's something going on there with like them being like representing Jewish people within their films that they were making. And maybe potentially also poking fun at themselves in a way. But then again, I don't really know 100%.
Yeah, I don't know either.
So, I like my grandfather was like almost 100% Jewish, like very, very Jewish. But I wasn't raised Jewish or anything like that. So like, I can't really tell you. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have the context to tell you.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that's part of it too, for me. It does feel like it's part of it is like the comedy of the scene is like in the way that they're talking.
Right.
And any like that sort of comedy always sort of rubs me the wrong way whenever I hear that for any. And maybe that's because I'm a white guy and like I feel like I'm acutely aware that if I'm laughing at a comedian who's doing like an accent or a funny voice, even if he's like depicting his grandmother or something, you know what I mean? I always feel kind of weird about laughing about that because I'm like, am I laughing because this sounds different to me and therefore comical, or am I laughing at what is actually being said or the
like,
joke?
Comedy also has trends, and like I think we were born into sort of more of like I don't know how to like more of a cynical way of looking at comedy too. Like sort of that would be seen like that sort of comedy that you're speaking of would be seen as like an older form of comedy that we don't necessarily connect to now.
I mean, there are comedians out there who do this sort of comedy.
Right. But I think sometimes it can be seen as a shtick or like people.
Yeah.
I think it can be written off. Some people do it successfully. I'm just
well,
saying,
and
like,
some people, it's like they do identify as that nationality and they find that funny because it speaks to their experience. And like I get that. I just feel weird as a white guy coming in and laughing at it too.
Right.
I
see what you're saying. Yeah, totally get that. So while we're talking about cast, let's just talk about everybody. Mandy Patinkin we mentioned as Inigo.
It's so cool to see him young and spry and
I know
action star when I think of him in like Homeland or something. Like he's this like old grizzled like, and like he's like striking Ginyu Force poses in this movie. You know what I mean? Like,
I know.
It's wild when he's
really,
doing
really
some of those fencing scenes, or when he was on the boat and he's like pulling the rope at one point. He was doing this like really dramatic pose. I thought was pretty funny.
Just the lunging. I don't know. A lot of like when he's like praying to the sword and then using it like a divining rod and then pokes into the door. Like that whole scene is a lot of fun.
Well, the way it was shot was cool too, though, like from below, and you see the like the sun god rays coming down over his head, which I guess is like a video game thing, but still, it looked cool. And then like it does imply that he is getting a message from his dead father or something, because he does end up getting pointed to the tree,
right,
to the secret opening.
Mandy Patinkin said that people obviously come up to him all the time and ask him to say, "My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die." And he says he's like 2 or 3 people a day will ask me to do it, and he says that he loves hearing it. He says like he's thrilled about it, and he can't believe that he's in like the Wizard of Oz of this generation. Yeah. And like just to sounds like he loves it. It was. I also heard in an interview that the first time they watched the premiere, he was like crying. He was like weeping because he was just so proud of this thing that they'd created.
Well, and it felt like, honestly, Inigo and Fezzik were more front and center from the beginning in this version, which I thought was a smart change. There was not a lot of time where we were spending with the man in black, the farm boy, and Buttercup before we got to the 3 arrive and kidnap Buttercup. That takes a little while in the book to happen. Mm-hmm. And I think there's also a lot more time. It felt like a lot more time goes by where Buttercup doesn't realize that she has feelings for the farm boy and continues to treat him like trash. Right. And like it takes like a bunch of stuff going down and he's like gonna get sent away or something before she realizes that she cares about him. I like that it was like 2 lines in the movie before she was like, and then she realized that she cared about him too, and I was like, thank you, because that stuff was kind of frustrating in the book for sure. As much as I've been talking up the book, like I remember being frustrated with Buttercup in the book. And like I gotta give like just you're making me think of something like I gotta give Goldwyn credit because within the context of his universe that he created, his meta universe, that chapter had to be sort of what it was because his son stopped reading it, right? So like it had to be, so like he's within his own narrative maybe making it sort of overly, I don't know, flowery, or like it was sort of spinning its wheels a little bit, like and
I don't know. Maybe that was purposeful, but
Yeah, I mean, like, we don't get any introduction of, like, the prince or the count or anybody coming to see Buttercup.
right.
We just cut to she's getting introduced to the people, too, after they leave. So, like, a lot of that start is shortened. I will say I think the prince is a less interesting character in the movie. He's definitely, like, full-on villain in both versions, and he just seems like much more of sort of a, I don't know, he's just a loser in the movie.
Yeah.
Whereas in the book, like, the guy has a zoo of death where he goes in and, like, wrestles bears and giant cobras and shit. Like, he's way more dangerous in the book.
Yeah, he's got some intimidation that you could actually feel, whereas, like, this version, you know that anyone can beat him, basically.
Yeah, you're like,
goes up
who's
against
this guy? Yeah, he's a stand a chance.
I want to talk about Robin Wright as Buttercup, and we talked last week. I talked last week and basically said she was more in on the joke in the movie, was sort of what I was remembering. And I don't know that necessarily really holds true. I do feel like she is a little bit more in on the joke still than the book, but in both versions, she doesn't have a ton to do. She's definitely just sort of the damsel in distress princess character being saved. But I mean, Robin Wright kills it in the performance regardless. Like, I still think that she's pretty magnetic on screen, and
Yeah, agree.
I think that, you know, with what she was given, she was memorable, you know, and that's maybe tough to do within sort of the archetype of a princess in distress.
I just remember her in the water with the shrieking eels, which I thought was a good change.
Yeah.
In the book, I believe it was just sharks.
Yeah, it was.
And then here it was like, we're gonna sort of invent a creature, like, you know, setting up the ROUSs later, so it's not the first time that this happens. And then they look pretty.
They're pretty
like,
freaky.
Scary.
Yeah, they're freaky.
Even pretty freaky. I mean, clearly like big puppet things, but still. And then it getting sort of knocked out by Fezzik is cool. Like, it shows like an early moment of him sort of saving her life.
Right. I mean, while we're talking about that scene, we should talk about Wallace Shawn as Vizzini.
Yeah. Now he is the character that I was like, this character could have gone so bad. But somehow he's enjoyable, even though he's definitely a shit. And like, he's the only real villain in these three. Like, you love the other two guys pretty much right off the bat.
Right.
They seem like great, solid guys.
Definitely.
But he's the villain. I actually forgot that, like, the whole plot of, like, we're going to set up Gilder and start a war, and then the reveal that the prince was behind it all along. I didn't remember that was all in the movie. I thought that was, like, a book-only plot, or some of that, like, got omitted, but it's all in there. I just never paid attention to it as a movie watcher. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, I think they do pretty good with Vizzini. Wallace Shawn's voice is forever linked to Vizzini. Like, when I was reading the pages, when we were reading the book, I heard Wallace Shawn, and I was just like,
and I agree.
Inconceivable. Like, no one can do that voice. But he's, you know, apparently, too, what's interesting is in the scene where they're actually doing the switcheroo with the wine, he's like sweating.
That reminds me of one of my favorite lines. Should I say it? Or
go for
are we
it.
getting into
Yeah, please go for it.
It was where he says, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, morons.
Yeah. I love the look that the man in black, Westley, at that point gives him to. He's just like, really? He's like, morons, eh?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just good stuff. I mean, like I said, the voice, he's so iconic to the role, but apparently Danny DeVito was the first choice to play the role.
Oh, that's funny.
And apparently he was stressed out by this. Wallace Shawn sort of felt like he was going to get fired off the movie at any time. And the scene where they're with the wine, he's like sweating profusely, I guess. And it was like partially due to like the number of takes that it took, and they just couldn't get it right. And he was freaking out like he was going to get fired, I guess. But really interesting to think, because, you know, I could see Danny DeVito in that role, but it would be different. I think Wallace Shawn brought what was necessary.
He would have brought his own spin to it. That would have been fun, though. I think it would have been good. But this is definitely, this feels right. I mean, it is the way that they went, so it feels right. I did think there was a particularly funny moment. I'm not going to quote him anymore because I feel like I've already hit my threshold on just quoting this movie, I think, at this point. But when Fezzik is climbing up the cliffs of insanity, and he's just doing the full arm climb, which it was right out of the book. I thought it was pretty funny how they had Vizzini like right in his face, so that he's climbing with his arms around him up the rope, and he's just like right in his face, like taunting him and telling him to climb faster and stuff. And it looks so goofy, but like it was fun. I don't know.
Right. So obviously they had to rig all that because Andre the Giant couldn't take any of that weight on his back.
Yeah, I thought he was probably just standing on the ground for that particular moment. But
I think so. They did a lot of like miniature work. They did a lot of like stunt doubles.
You
and
could
stuff
tell
like
in the HD that there was some miniatures going on for sure.
Backdrops, like set backdrops.
You could tell that there was painted. Like the sunset was painted and stuff.
Definitely.
Like,
so there's a story that I heard in the special features about Wallace Shawn being deathly afraid of heights, but then they needed all the actors to actually physically go up the wall on one take, and like a forklift would sort of lift them up over time and bring them up the cliff face. And he could not. He's like, I will not do this. I'm going to ruin the movie. I can't do it. It's over. I'm not doing it. And Andre the Giant, in his very thick accent, like said, "Do not worry, I will protect you," and like was stroking his face. And then he did that as they like were rising up during the take or something like that. And then they went back up and down a few times in order to get the takes. And Wallace Shawn, like reportedly, was fine the entire time that Andre was like comforting him.
I mean, he is a man who could hold you, a grown man, in his arms, and you would feel like an infant if he did that. Yeah. So I can see how that would be comforting.
Right. So great story. One more character we need to talk about: Cary Elwes as Westley. He was cast because he has like the good looks to go along with sort of the quippiness and the swashbuckling that goes on the sword fighting, which I'm going to talk about the sword fighting. We're going to get to that.
He had to have gotten Robin Hood Men in Tights
because of this.
That's him, right? He had to have gotten that because of this, right?
Yes, totally. And I was gonna get into that. So Rob Reiner wanted sort of the Douglas Fairbanks, Errol Flynn, like 1920s, 1930s, like swashbuckling kind of thing, and so apparently because he really fit the bill, he had the looks, he could do a lot of the swashbuckling sword fighting, and then he had the quippy, and he understood the comedy, so he cast him for that reason. And then Douglas Fairbanks and Errol Flynn both played Robin Hood. Fairbanks played him in 1922's Robin Hood, and then Flynn played him in The Adventures of Robin Hood in 1938. And then Elwes would later spoof their performances in Robin Hood Men in Tights in 1993. Mm-hmm. So sort of
I
continuing.
bet you that movie does not hold up well at all, but I have fun memories of watching it.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I have not seen it in forever. I haven't seen it since probably like 2000. So I don't know if it holds up.
I bet it doesn't.
Yeah,
but still, it's one of those movies that's probably just best left in the past as just a fond memory.
I also found out that the Dread Pirate Roberts was a real pirate. Did you hear about this at all?
I did not know that. That's funny too, because I've heard about a lot of pirates.
Yeah, so
I would have thought I recognized it.
Bartholomew Roberts, also known as Black Bart, who operated in the Caribbean in the early 18th century.
I think I've heard of Black Bart. I've heard of Blackbeard for sure, and I know that's not him, but I think I have also heard of Black Bart. I just didn't know he was called the Dread Pirate.
According to this, factoid that I found here, he is reckoned by many to have been the most successful pirate of all time. So
I wonder if there was any conspiracy theories that he was multiple people.
Right, I wonder. Yeah,
that'd be fun. I feel like I've heard that about somebody. I don't know if it was Blackbeard or somebody else or somebody. I feel like this is a thing I've heard of that people thought that there might have been more than one of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe it. I mean, it makes sense, right? To continue the legacy and be that dangerous.
Well, and then there's also impersonators. So even if you're not officially the new whatever, like you just say you are because they have the name ID, right? And you want people to just surrender and not try and fight you.
Right, for the same reason that Westley did it.
They're pirates, so there are no rules. Just do whatever you want.
Exactly, yeah. We're finishing up cast right now. I just wanted to say there were a couple people who were going to play Fezzik at different times. So apparently Arnold Schwarzenegger was vying for the role. He really wanted it in the early 70s when it was first being pitched around. And then by the 80s when they actually were able to get, because this movie was stuck in development hell for a while, and when they were able to finally get it made, Arnold was the biggest movie star in the world and he was too expensive, so they couldn't get him anymore. And when Andre the Giant was busy doing his WWF stuff, once he had finished that, he was available to actually take on the role. But apparently at one point, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was offered the role. Which,
wow.
That's amazing. Like that it would have changed the movie completely, but that would have been crazy, right? That would have been really cool.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to talk about Rob Reiner briefly, and then we can talk about plot and sort of some other behind the scenes stuff that I learned and other stuff like that we can analyze the movie a little more. Rob Reiner is an American actor, comedian, and filmmaker. As an actor, Reiner first came to national prominence with the role of Michael Stivic on the CBS comedy All in the Family, a performance that earned him 2 Primetime Emmy Awards. As a director, Reiner was recognized by the Directors Guild of America Awards with nominations for the coming-of-age drama Stand By Me in 1986, the romantic comedy... Go ahead.
It's a Stephen King thing, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
The romantic comedy When Harry Met Sally in 1989, and the military courtroom drama A Few Good Men in 1982, the last of which earned him a nomination for the Academy Award for Best Picture. He has also received 4 nominations for the Golden Globe Award for Best Director. His other major directorial film credits include heavy metal rock mockumentary This Is Spinal Tap, 1984, the romantic comedy fantasy adventure The Princess Bride, the psychological horror thriller Misery in 1990, the romantic comedy drama The American President, 1995, the buddy comedy The Bucket List, 2007, and the biographical political drama LBJ in 2016. So I wanted to talk specifically about This Is Spinal Tap because I think up to that point he had made, up to the point of Princess Bride, he had made This Is Spinal Tap, and I think he had shot but hadn't released Stand By Me or something like that. So
this was pretty early on in his directorial career, you're saying?
Right,
Yeah.
and then When Harry Met Sally wasn't until after The Princess Bride, so sort of right in the middle. And for him to get this film made, so the reason he pursued Princess Bride is he was a huge fan of the book. Apparently, his father Carl Reiner, who I spoke about earlier, realized that Rob Reiner would enjoy the book because he enjoyed all of Goldman's other stuff, and Goldman and Reiner were working on something together at the time. And so then he was able to take that book to Rob Reiner and say, here, read this. And then he loved it for a long time. And then he released This Is Spinal Tap. And then during production of Stand By Me, he spoke with executives at Paramount regarding Princess Bride, and they told him he couldn't make it, leading to him discovering that several studios had previously attempted to bring this book to the big screen. I was pretty surprised at the people who were attached to it. So other directors at different times who were looking to adapt this story were Francois Truffaut, who we've talked about. We actually talked about him on a bonus episode.
Fahrenheit 451, right?
Yeah, we talked about him on our Fahrenheit 451 bonus episode. Hugely influential for French New Wave.
And that one's out on the main feed if you look back through the From the Vault. I think that's one of our From the Vault episodes we have released.
Right. So he was looking to direct. Robert Redford was looking to direct at one point, and also Norman Jewison were looking to direct. And also Christopher Reeve was interested in playing Westley.
Okay. So, yeah, I could see that. He had that charisma.
Yeah. And so it's really interesting that, he had made This Is Spinal Tap. He was trying to get this movie made. And then Norman Lear, who's hugely influential in television history, knew Reiner from All in the Family and basically was able to get the funding for Princess Bride because he, was able to pull his Hollywood magic. But basically, Goldman was able to see that Reiner would be able to understand, he could adapt it because of This Is Spinal Tap and a romantic film that he had made right before. And I think what's really interesting is Rob Reiner created one of the first mockumentary films, and Goldman was able to look at. Are you familiar with This Is Spinal Tap at all?
I haven't seen it, but I am familiar with it. Yeah,
so
I've seen enough about it to kind of know what it's about.
Right. So shows like The Office, This Is Spinal Tap for sort of their whole format, the framing device, and for Goldman to look and see that this director who created this and then also created a romance, that he could blend the two and create Princess Bride and find the right tone, it takes a lot of trust, I think, because This Is Spinal Tap still holds up and it's funny to me. I saw it a few years ago, but it's not the same kind of comedy as this movie. So it's really interesting to see the range of what Reiner has been able to do throughout his career. Mostly kind of sticking to some comedy at least, but moving into a lot of different stuff. And I don't know, I couldn't believe that all these people were attached to Princess Bride at different times, and it took 10 years for it to get adapted because I think studios just really didn't know what to do with it. They couldn't figure out how it could be adapted or what it would even look like, who you could sell it to, that sort of thing.
So he seems like a director that really has some range. You listed some pretty heavy dramas in there. He's got all these comedies. That's an impressive list of movies, even though I haven't seen all of them. But it's cool to see that someone who can not get sort of pigeonholed as like this is the only kind of film you can make.
Yeah.
I just like to see that.
And I mean, later, like more recent films that have come out, he's gotten very political with his movies and like is really trying to like, you know, be an activist with what he's doing. So, I mean, power to him for doing that. Cause like he started with a lot of comedy and realized like he could, you know, create movies of all sorts. He kind of reminds me, not as much the comedy elements, but something about his like everyman director sort of thing reminds me of like a Ron Howard, or like because he was like a child star or like a younger star that eventually turned to directing and directed. Their list is really diverse in terms of like what they cover. So reminds me of him some.
Cool.
All right, so let's start talking about, I think we're just going to move chronologically. We're not going to do specifically a summary, but I do want to talk about, you know, events that happen, and we can sort of talk about, you know, the changes and like how we felt about the scenes. I also do want to kind of shout out just in general, the set design is, you mentioned like for the time, like the matte paintings, of course, are there. You've got your
That's okay.
Yeah. But a lot of like the sort of like even the forest that when they're going through the fire swamp, he's cutting through the limbs and stuff.
It seems like it's all a set to me.
Right, it is all a set, but like they dress it up to look really good, and for the most part, like, you know, they went for it. It wasn't like,
it weirdly reminded me a little bit of another project we've covered. Can you think of what it might have reminded me of?
If weirdly, huh? The fire swamp specifically?
Yeah, the fire swamp in particular.
Was it Enemy Mine?
It was.
Yeah.
Good pull.
Nice,
Yeah,
pulled it.
It was that 80s sort of like everything is this like crafted set. You get the little kind of puppets, and you got guys wearing rat suits.
Yeah, which we'll get to that. But yeah, I can see that. I don't know how I pulled that, but somehow I did.
That's funny. Yeah.
So we've kind of touched on, you know, the beginnings at the farm, and then, you know, he goes off and dies supposedly, and let's catch all the way back up to sort of the cliffs of insanity. We talked about the screeching eels. When they actually get up this cliff of insanity, the sword fight that happens there. Rob Reiner specifically went about saying this is going to be the greatest sword fight, the longest sword fight of all time. So apparently, in order to create the greatest sword fight in modern times, Cary Elwes and Mandy Patinkin trained for months with Peter Diamond and Bob Anderson, who between them had been in the Olympics, worked on James Bond, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Star Wars. They coached Errol Flynn and Burt Lancaster. Every spare moment on set was spent practicing. Eventually, they showed Rob Reiner the sword fight for the movie. He was underwhelmed and requested that it be at least 3 minutes longer rather than the current 1 minute. They added steps to the set, watched more swashbuckling movies for inspiration, re-choreographed the scene, and ended up with a 3-minute, 10-second fight, which took the better part of a week to film from all angles.
Wow.
And to me, the most fascinating part is that when you look, you can see that it's really them. You know what I mean? It's almost entirely them. There's the moment where the man in black like jumps on the thing and flips around the bar and like flies off. Like clearly that wasn't him, but all the sword fighting, all the choreography as far as like slapping the sword away and poking each other, that sort of thing.
Mandy Patinkin probably didn't do that jump over his head, twist and tuck and land on his feet that he does at one point.
Right.
Yeah, there's a couple of moments where you know it's a stuntman, but other than that, it seemed like it was all them.
But like that sort of choreography is really fun to watch. Like because it's real.
No, it's a great fight. I think it looks great. I think it holds up. And yeah, like you said, the fact, you know what, that and that's a good point. Just as like a modern a moment to sort of soapbox for a second is that, man, there's nothing beats like a take where you can see the moves in an action movie.
Yeah.
And rather than one move, cut, one move, cut, one move, cut, one move, cut. I've started getting so frustrated with those kind of fights. And like I know that they can work for people, but like they just turn me off so bad when someone gets on like an elevator or something and they get in a fight and there's 75 cuts and you know it's like it's not 75, but it's like 5 or 10 cuts in a 30-second thing instead of like a 1 to 2 cut, like show some moves, show some choreography.
Right.
And I mean I know it's hard, but like it works so much better, man.
Exactly. It's how hard are you willing to work, right? Like on set, it's easier to shoot a bunch of little shots and cut it together and make it look really action-packed.
Another punch.
Exactly.
A leg kick. Everyone a separate take that you can do multiple times and get just right. And then, but then it's super choppy and it doesn't feel real to me.
The choreography is so difficult. You have to dedicate yourself to that, and like that's why it's so impressive, you know, because they did spend.
It just gives me more appreciation for the Daredevil hallway scene from season 1.
Yeah.
Great scene.
Great scene. You were talking about crazy cuts in action movies and stuff, and I always laugh when I watch this scene from Taken. Liam Neeson is like an older man at this point when Taken's being made, and he has to like jump over a fence, and there's like 30 cuts for him to jump over this fence and for it to look like action packed. So like they're like coming different angles and and he like is just jumping over a fence, and it's very, very funny to me every time I see it. That's sort of what I think of when I think of like cut, like way too heavily cut, and for that, I guess in that case you have to forgive him a little bit because he's an older man who it would be tough to jump over a fence.
Sometimes you have to do it because of limitations like that.
But it's still funny. It doesn't prevent it from being funny to me because like
the other thing I think is that sometimes directors need to let go of perfection, which is probably really tough for people to do. But I think people get too obsessed with, I want every moment of this fight to look exactly how I want it to look. And if I do one take, I won't get that. There'll be some sort of like sloppiness in there. Something won't be as crisp as I want it to be. But that is good. Keep it. It's more authentic. I don't know. I like that.
Sometimes, yeah. It's got to look good, though. You know what I mean? It's still got to look...
Yeah, it can't look bad. Right. That is the thing. It can't look terrible, but
a
little bit of agree, that wasn't as crisp is fine if it feels more authentic to a fight to me.
Right. It's not that there weren't cuts in this fight either. There clearly were. It's just like they extended
and there are.
Cuts.
It wasn't like one long cut or anything.
Right.
But yeah, there were long moments of them actually having real swordplay.
Right.
It wasn't swing cut.
It's just very impressive to me because that's not their trade. They're actors. They're there to act, and then on top of that, they take it upon themselves and they act. And the director tells them that he wants this scene, and they go for it. And you know what? I love watching that scene because it's so kinetic. Like it feels so real. So.
It's a great one. And then the other thing too, it's a fight between two characters we really like.
Right.
So that's really interesting too, right? It's not a moment where it's one guy's going to beat the shit out of the guy that you hate, or he's just a goon, or he's just, like final boss number 2, final sub boss number 2, who happens to be really good at martial arts or whatever. Like he's a character you really, really like, and you're like, well, what's going to happen here? They're fighting to the death,
right?
And so it gives some cool sort of stakes to the whole moment.
So moving into the bait and switch of the wine with the poison, I think if anybody ever were to say, like, put me in the same situation and say, I want to know actually from you, if you had to pick one of the two glasses and you didn't know that they were both poisoned, psychologically, like, which one are you taking?
Well, it's impossible. And that's what I love about the scene. It's an impossible problem he's set up to where, and I think, other than the fact that he's super ham-handed about it and obvious, the idea Vizzini has to make him look away and swap the cups and then watch his reaction is probably the best play you can make.
Right.
Because if you notice, he kind of hesitates for a moment as they pick up the cups. Like, that's the best play you can make at that point, because ultimately there's no way you can suss out, in my opinion, which glass is which, because there's a million reasons why he could have chosen either one. And he outlines a bunch of them. And any one of them could be the reason that he chose. But it's going to be one of them, and it can't be all of them, right? It has to be one or the other if it wasn't just one. So I think he does play it the best way you could, and to credit to him, he just is outcrafted because he, in that moment, thinks that the other guy's not going to cheat, because that's something that he doesn't seem like the kind of person who would do, but he does because he out-cheats the cheater, I guess.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why we're okay with that.
Yeah, it's just a fun scene, and the inconceivable, it's all, and the misuse of it, and then like the calling out of that, and all of that's from the book too.
Oh my God. I mean, talk about fucking like memes that you'll see on the internet everywhere,
right?
Like you keep using that word, like that one is.
Yeah, I do not think it means what you think it means. Yeah, so good. All right, let's move into the fire swamp, and let's talk about the
I had a question about the fire swamp. I don't know if you saw this in any of the materials you have, or it's just a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
How did they create a sand pit that someone could jump headfirst into and not hurt themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think clearly the whole set that they're on is elevated because they're having to shoot fire from underneath it too.
So he went through like some sort of thing and like landed on a pad, or was it like a pool down there, or what?
I assume underneath it's probably those like pits with like
the
foam.
He went head first into it.
Yeah, that was probably a stunt double. I'll say that for sure.
Yeah, probably was, but still, even anybody to do that, man, that's scary.
Yeah. And like I just would assume pit of foam, but who really knows? Maybe there's a thing of water underneath there.
Yeah,
and he just dove into
pit
it.
of foam would probably work pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I was trying to figure it out. I was like, it's a cool effect they were able to achieve. You're right. I think the whole thing's probably elevated that in that moment, so they could create that. It was cool.
Yeah. All right. ROUS.
Yeah.
What do we think?
Those are fun, man. And they're so much bigger because I feel like I don't know if they changed sizes or if it's just the perspective at one point or what, but it seemed like they got bigger and bigger. And then, but when he's fighting it, it's full on as big as he is.
Yeah.
It's a person wearing a rat costume.
And it really is. Yeah. There were people in there.
Yeah.
For
sure.
One of the funniest parts that always at least gives me a chuckle is when she's like, "What about the ROUS?" And he's like, "Oh, I don't believe they're real." And he just gets immediately.
I don't even think they exist or something like that.
It's so good.
Immediately tackled.
It's so
that is laugh out loud funny. I agree.
Yeah, and like the fire swamp looks really good, like we've said. And then to move into, I want to talk about the pit of despair.
There's this moment where the grandfather is reading the book and he says like, no, continue. And he says, let's see, where were we? Oh yes, in the pit of despair. And I immediately thought like, oh, that's every day that we wake up during the pandemic. Let's see, where were we? Oh yes, the pit of despair.
Oh yes.
As soon as you open up Twitter, oh yes, now I remember.
I mean, it's funny because it's such a generalized location, right? Of course, like any fantasy, like your fairy tale is gonna have like your typical sort of name like that, and it's so funny because it like you said, it kind of serves two purposes, especially today. How about the machine? Like, do you feel like the suction looked like it's really gonna suck some years off your life, or what do you think? Like, I feel like that was probably one of the hardest things to try to pull off in camera, like to make a machine, because clearly it doesn't necessarily work. It's kind of campy, and like it's fine for that reason.
Yeah. Oh, it's super campy, but I mean, it's fine. I think it works for this movie.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff is very tongue in cheek, it's very silly. The albino and like the way that he's such a character, right? He's cracking jokes and stuff, making really certain faces they're quite comical. All that whole sequence is kind of goofy, but still effective.
What's the name of the person who helps Dr. Frankenstein? I can't think of him.
Igor?
Igor, yeah. That's sort of the Igor of the Pit of Despair, right? Very much like.
Yeah, I guess it is, yeah.
I wanted to talk about how, I think we've basically gotten to the end now. Is there anything else you want to talk about? I guess we can talk about how wild it is to have like a resurrective element to the story, but it happens in the book too.
It's a very fantasy thing to do, man. Think about all the fantasies where people come back.
Yeah.
I like the Weekend at Bernie's antics that go on at the end with Westley, the sort of like limp, mastermind of the whole rescue at the end. I think that was a lot of fun. And continues to be quite comical.
Right, and the last sort of feud between the prince and Westley, at the very end when they're in his chamber or whatever, and he's like actually like bluffing and sort of holding the sword to him and everything, and telling him to tie.
Which that is right out of the book, and honestly, I feel like it works better in the movie because the guy isn't as formidable.
Yeah,
I was kind of surprised when it went down that way in the book, but. Just because the character had been set up to be very different than that. But,
and I do think, I can't remember for sure, but I can't remember in the book that he even stands. I think he stays in the bed the whole time. So I felt like standing up and actually moving made it a little more, like I could buy it more. And then, the fact that he's sort of like not the same prince as the murderous Death Zoo one.
When we talked about this scene earlier, but we are arrived there in the fiction. So I want to know if there's anything else you have to say about it. But the confrontation with the six-fingered man, the way he runs away and then throws the dagger, like it's a great like sort of all is lost moment for the story, right? Like the black moment, people call it, different things like that, where you can't believe, like how, like he's finally found this guy and then he's gonna die, is what it seems like, right? And then he's able to sort of power through it, and the power of his vengeance is able to like overcome the wounds that he's taken, right? As he's bleeding from both arms and from his gut.
I mean, it makes for good drama. That's what I'll say about it. Like it's good. I enjoy it within the context of this story, and it works because it's in within the context of this story, and I like otherworldly, I like the internals of a character affecting the outer world, and like this idea that his willpower allowed him to best.
It's
this
believable
person.
too, It can be adrenaline, it can happen.
Sure.
I like it. I just want to touch on that scene again. It's a good scene.
It's a good scene.
One of my favorites from the end.
I also really like this idea from the movie that as they're jumping out the window, Inigo says, I've been looking for vengeance for so long, I don't know who I am without it. And then he's like, you'd make a good, Dread Pirate Rogers and all of that. I think that's cool, that idea. Roberts. I said Rogers. Oh, boy.
Good Dread Pirate Aaron Rodgers.
Oh, Dread Rogers. The Jolly Roger Dread.
Anyway, I don't know. I'm mixed about that. Like, Inigo becoming a pirate, like, right. I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm glad he doesn't like full on accept it, but it is the implication that he's gonna become a pirate. And like, I guess we're supposed to believe in this world it's the romantic version of a pirate, right? Like, it's not super violent all the time, like
raping and pillaging,
like horrific life. Yeah. But I want something something nice for Inigo that's not violent. I don't know, personally.
Specifically with that scene, the thing I like is like the idea that he's now found. Like, I think the moral of the story, like the idea that he's searched for vengeance for so long and now it's gone. And like, who is he without it? And like, just like, like wasting your life away, running after something, vengeance or whatever, like harboring.
Just reminds me of that story that's in the deluxe version. I mean, I know it's out of sequence, but we do get this like scene about Inigo having a romantic connection, which I really liked. And it was like something that I really wanted from that character. And then we know a little bit about what goes on with him, but you'll have to read the book if you want to hear about that, or at least listen to our episode where we talk about it. Last episode.
So last thing I want to talk about is Mandy Patinkin went to a screening and he said there was like no one in the theater. And it seems like that was the story of the premiere, and not the premiere, but the release of this film was that people
wasn't it kind of a flop?
It kind of was. I don't know that it fully flopped. Like, I don't know that it didn't recoup any money or anything like that. I didn't look to see the actual numbers, but I know it didn't. It didn't become what it is until home release. And it's very interesting to think about how important home releases used to be for movies, and the way that the cult following could be so organic, and like the world we live in now with release. And I know word of mouth.
I think it just happens faster now. You know what I mean? It's like accelerated. If something is really good, you're gonna hear about it because people are gonna get on Twitter and you're gonna hear about it fast. Whereas that took a while to build up, I think.
Right. Well, and like, is there something to be said about like people weren't ready for the movie then? I guess my question is like, when it came out, if audiences weren't ready for it, the fact that it took a long time for it to get popular and then audiences developed into it and now it's like such a massive cultural touchstone, can that still happen with it? Or do these movies that come out now, are they watched and then forgotten and then not given that sort of like second life when the audience matures into that movie? Those sort of movies that I think were before their time sort of thing.
I think it can still happen. I think it might look a little different now.
Yeah.
Would be my only guess about what might have changed. But yeah, I want to believe that still can happen.
Yeah, I mean, so do I. I just wonder. That's really just me wondering.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, I don't know. I want to think so. So we need to take our final vote. That is something we've been doing this year, trying to decide whether or not we felt like the book or the movie was better. I'm ready to go first. If you,
yeah, I mean, you can go first. Well, let me just start. I won't say my answer, but I do want to say I'm super conflicted with this one. That's where I'll leave it. I'm very conflicted, and I didn't make my decision before, and like sort of the conversation. I'm gonna make it just based on everything right now. But I want you to go first.
Well, don't let me affect you too much. I want you to make.
No, I
won't.
I know. I have my answer now. I'm just saying, like before, up until this point, I hadn't really locked it in, and now I have it.
All right, so. This movie's great, and I think reading the book has helped me see that it's great. I think before I felt like it was good. I felt like it was funny, but I didn't see what like the huge deal was, because a lot of people really love this movie, and I wasn't quite there. I think reading the book really helped me get there. I had a lot of fun talking about it. I had a lot of fun with the performances, iconic scenes, iconic direction. This whole episode is the exhibit of that, but I think you know where this is going. That book was incredible. I did not expect to like it as much as I did. I prefer the framing device in the book. I like being on the author's side, which might not surprise anyone. I like seeing it from that perspective. And then I really like the additional materials. But I'm going to actually remove Buttercup's baby from the sort of arithmetic here. Because I love that piece, but I don't think it's fair to let that tip it over. I think just on the material alone, I still am going to let the book edge out the movie for me as the better version of this, which I would have never guessed going into this project that I would feel this way, but I actually do.
Yeah.
That's just me.
I mean,
Where you at?
I've said this is one of my favorite movies. I've also said it's a movie that grows with you. So like I saw it when I was pretty young and it's grown with me. It's like I haven't matured out of it. It's not one of these like kids movies that I saw and I can't watch anymore. It's been steadfast. It's always been there. And it will be for a long time. I'm going to continue to love watching it. Reading the book recontextualized a lot of stuff for me though. And I think I was, again, I agree with you. I was blown away by the book. I'm not going to take the Buttercup's baby and like the preface and sort of like the two introductions out of the arithmetic, because I am going to give it to the book because of everything together. I think,
Really?
yeah,
Okay.
I think I'm giving it to specifically the person who's approaching stories, like me, myself today, who is looking at stories in this way and thinking about which one's like, I think the tightrope act of what Goldman was able to accomplish in the book is more impressive to me. And I love the movie. Like, do not get me wrong. I'm like edging it out by ever so much. Both things are great, but I think I'm taking the book for the sheer fact that almost everything comes straight out of the book. And also those additional materials serve to like create this really interesting world that's like a fake, like our world, but it's like a fake version of it. And then then there's also the world of the story and just like the way that the author is interacting with the audience. It's a unique story, and it's clearly super influential, and I know the movie is as well. And those performances are like unforgettable. But I'm taking the book.
Wow, I did not expect that. But I mean, I'm right there with you. And, it's something I don't know that we mentioned last time was how he in those extra materials, well, I'll gauge with that for a moment. He takes he takes the movie and wraps it right into the narrative, right? Like it becomes part of the mythos.
Right.
He meets with Andre the Giant in Florin City, this fictional city, and has this conversation with him, which I don't know if it actually occurred or not. Like he sort of, the way that he is sort of telling truth, but also fictionalizing, and it's very difficult to tell the difference between the two. It's just really cool.
Right.
And then, he takes this whole adaptation, rolls it right into it without missing a beat, and it becomes part of this whole grand story. It's truly an impressive work. And I know it's one that we talked about last week that William Goldman felt like was kind of his like crowning achievement. It was right there. And, I can see that. I can see why you felt that way.
Yeah.
So, I feel good about it. I think this is a good place to end our Princess Bride coverage. Do stick around for the end of the episode, though, because we're going to announce our next project, which I am excited about.
Yeah, I'm also really excited about this project. This week, we wanted to thank one of our newest patrons, Sarah H. Thank you so much for becoming a patron. We really appreciate your support. And if you also, listener, wanted to help support the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/inktofilm. We have all kinds of tiers, everything from $1 up. And with the $2 tier, you get our bonus episodes, which come out monthly. And we also wanted to say, with it being our 3-year anniversary and everything, we are going to be rolling out new things for Patreon, new things for the show in general. So keep your eyes out for those. We promise they're coming very soon. They're just not quite ready to roll out right this second. So, in a celebration of our 3 years, there will be some changes and some new stuff coming.
Yeah, over the rest of the year, we're going to be making some changes. We'll see how it goes, but there's going to be some new tiers, some new options, some changing of some things. Keep an eye on that. You can follow us on there if you're not ready to make a commitment. You can just follow us on Patreon, and that'll like keep you appraised of what's going on. But we appreciate any support that people are willing to give us. But if money is not your thing and you'd rather just listen to it for free, that's fine. We would love it if you left us a rating and review on whatever podcast app you use. Helps us get the word out and lets people know that this is a show worth listening to.
And make sure you connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at inktofilm. On Facebook, we have the Council of Inklings. We post polls and any sort of adaptation news that we see. So it's a good way to stay connected.
We are going to be covering a new movie that a lot of people are excited about. I've been hearing a lot of buzz about, based off of a series of comics, The Old Guard on Netflix. I don't know much else about it other than it's got some like immortal characters or something. I don't know. I've been hearing great things. I haven't been looking too much into it because I knew it might be something we'd cover. So I'm excited to see if I love it as much as like I've been hearing people love it.
Yeah, I'm excited. Anytime we can cover any like graphic novels or comics of any kind, it's always adds like an interesting element that we don't get to do all the time.
It'll be cool. We just purchased our copies. I saw a little preview of the art in there. It looks exciting. It looks interesting. So I'm into it.
All right, so I did want to say before everybody goes, bye-bye. Have fun storming the castle. And until next time.
Thanks for listening.